you have arrived at a mechanism, means by which you can enhance the life of another human being so profoundly by giving them a better vessel. You don't live at, 1212 Main Street. You live in your body because it worked when you're on 22 Main Street. Well, guess where you live, right? So you live here and now where you are in the vessel, in the body, right?
Yeah.
And if the body is betraying you because you just didn't know better, what a shame that is. That's like pushing on the pull door and wondering why the door is locked.
Mr. David Weck, welcome on the Evolve and Play podcast. This has been, I think, one of these conversations that are kind of a long time coming. I think we've stumbled on to some similar perspectives from very different places. And that's always interesting. I think of those as sort of like independent verification methods, right? Like, okay, this person's thinking about this from a very different perspective and somehow ending up in a similar place. As I was just saying, off there, we've had a lot of kind of friends in common, like DJ Murakami, folks like that. And Joel Smith has been one of my students, one of your students.
Yeah. Oh, he's amazing. Yeah, well, DJ's amazing. And DJ is like a true movement geek, right? A movement nerd who's pretty darn strong and, sort of is pulling the esoteric into his practice in interesting ways. I've really enjoyed my time with DJ. Yeah. And Joel is a biomechanist who's, in the field coaching people all the time. And he has correct understanding is what I would call it. He's not making mistakes. Let's put it that way. And I would say that there is X on the map. There is, where you want to be, and then there are paths to it, right? So you can find the center. A tiger can find the center. I can find the center, right? So the important thing is that you're aiming accurately with correct intent. That's the foundation, right? The bedrock for everything is what you're thinking. Does that align with optimal biomechanical, what you actually want to do? Because if you're aiming askew, then it's going to be very difficult to bend the arrow to hit the target as precisely as you would otherwise hit it. So at worst, the standard, the minimum, is that your aim is within the circle surrounding X. So you're let's picture the bullseye on this is huge because it's so easy to walk with perfectly balanced locomotion. Like it is so easy. It's just as easy as walking poorly. It's just a different motor strategy that actually feels better and becomes way easier once you take the 3 weeks it takes to walk upstairs and learn how to just simply put the head over the foot, right? And so that you got to relate to gait because gait is more important than water and food if you don't have water and food. And, the Poland Springs guy's not coming today, right? I got to get up and I got to go get it. And then as soon as it doesn't take a few dollars or a credit card to acquire it, well, now I need a stick and I need a stone, I need a rope because we don't have anything else. And a stick just falls out of a tree now, doesn't it? A stone, right? Just pick it up. You didn't have to manufacture. You didn't build molds, right? Yeah. You didn't build a marketing budget. It was at your disposal here and now. A tiger moves with perfectly balanced locomotion. A human being informed with correct intent, or born into a culture where everyone around them had demonstrated the correct intent, and then did physical movements like locomoting, swinging, throwing, catching, carrying, the 5 fundamental survival functions, right? It's not, a hip hinge, this. Those are fundamental components of a whole greater thing that's going to bring dinner home. Right. And defend the hearth.
The way I tend to think about like something like a hip hinge, it's an abstraction from the concreteness of the types of movement that we actually use to solve problems. Right.
It's a contrivance to think in terms of 3 planes of motion independently. And this exercise is for this range of, this plane of motion. You deal with the reality, which is 3 dimensions, 6 degrees of freedom, go. Gravity defines where, it defines when. Okay, rate of acceleration, 9.8 meters per second squared, where the center of the Earth. All right.
Okay.
What do I have to do? Well, I don't know. What's the DNA have to do? You have to send signals, right? That, makes you dance, right?
Mhm.
So that signaling is going to be extremely clean and efficient so that when calories are precious, you're not going to do burpees and you're not going to hit a tire with a sledgehammer, because if I do that, I will burn the calories that I don't have. I need to preserve the calories, which means you could make an argument, because of the strategy of verticality, we move with better, perfectly balanced locomotion than a tiger. He will run and jump faster and more agile. His reactions quicker. He's got claws and teeth.
But
But
we have more degrees of freedom than the tiger has, which is the problem and the benefit of being a human being. But let me slow you down, David.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yep.
Yeah, you're such a brilliant guy, and you've been thinking about this stuff so deeply. But I want to try to just slow you down a little bit because my audience may not be super familiar with your model. And we ended up in this conversation specifically because we had an interaction on X about the sort of dogma of the neutral spine.
Oh, yeah. That's my issue.
So I come at this stuff from well, you're sort of very biomechanically focused, and you've done this really, really deep read of all the biomechanical literature, the spinal engine literature, and I've brushed up against that stuff. But my focus has always been on educating people in movement skills, right? I was a gymnastics coach. I trained martial arts since I was a small child. I dabbled in teaching martial arts. It became one of the first generation of parkour coaches, and then I developed this model of natural movement. And interestingly, just through my sort of experimentation and coaching, I started adopting a lot of the constraints-led approach and sort of ecological dynamics approaches, which gives a lot more room to the idea that we have to let the body solve it, and that we can't be that when we become over prescriptive of movement, we develop problems. And so as I sort of adopt that approach, I start noticing all these people are coming to work with me who are physical therapists and they're personal trainers, and they cannot move their spine outside of this neutral, and then they get hurt all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, my perspective on this is not so much like, oh, I've read all of the strength and conditioning literature on it. I haven't done a deep dive into Stuart McGill. I've brushed up against his stuff, but it's more of this thing of like, what's the evolutionary perspective? Why in the world does the spine have all of these capabilities if you're not supposed to use them? If you're supposed to treat the spine as one joint, why isn't it one joint?
Well, that's an existential question in and of itself. Like, if I'm going to build a human, why am I going to make a foot that has all these articulations? You go, why am I going to build like a wheel in a rocket? You know what I mean? A wheel on springs with a rocket. How about this? 0 point. So you're always building on the frame that comes before. And everything now at this point is just a theory. Okay. Evolution. It's a theory that is wrong, that is useful for the mental gymnastics of understanding yourself, your surroundings, and what you want to do right now. Okay, that's what evolution is. Because if you look at the Cambrian explosion, okay, when all these phylotypes or genotypes start coming up in different phylums, it's like the mathematical probability of it happening from like some primordial soup with no viable amino acids. Like, how the hell? Oh, a lightning bolt. Suddenly I have not just amino acids, but I have a complete chain that is useful in the construction and, cooperation with the other structures. So anyway, but that aside, if you're going to play the game, okay, it's evolution. Well, then it starts out in fluid, the buoyancy of the salt water, the ocean, right? And God says, eat, don't be eaten, go. And these little amoeba things start wiggling because they're hungry and they don't want to be thinner. So they do this. And if you have a membrane that is like more than just pure water. There is something in it that's on the path to cartilage, right? That oscillation over and over and over will have a sine wave frequency that will now ossify and harden a segment, zoom, and then have a soft segment. Ossify and harden, and then the concentration of the force between two hards fortifies the soft. And that's how, and then all they got to do is this, because they don't have the burden of gravity. So all they got to do is this. And a shark can only breach the surface if he goes down deep and he comes back up. And that's why a dolphin is like a shark. That's like a guy doing a Pallof press, and I do Weck Method. It's just, I can flank the guy because a dolphin can breach at will anytime. Just flank the shark, you hit him in the gills as many times as it takes, and then the shark stops swimming and the shark dies, right?
The dolphin has evolved a greater set of degrees of freedom.
Correct. And so let me just say this, because I'll simplify it. So from Piscean, just this, the amphibian's going to venture out. I want to see what's over the horizon over there, right? Okay, as soon as I have the burden of gravity, I am still building on what was formed before. Right? The parent and the offspring are going to be structurally similar. And then new tasks will transform structure. The structure will dictate the function right now, and a different function will now slowly over time transform that structure. So if someone's foot's collapsing, for 25 years, well, you might not get it out of the position. It's so structurally changed.
Yeah.
So now the amphibian, the way that I move forward efficiently is not brace myself and do this. It's I do that. I can do that. I could be cold-blooded. It takes no energy. And then I just do that little bit, right? And the other side's, hip is doing the cooperative figure eight. And so what you created the spinal engine when the creatures were lying on their belly. That's when the spinal engine was born, because Piscean, in the gravitational constraint, now it has to go 3D, right? There is no 2D. You know what I'm saying? It's the efficiency of survival. And then, well, what the mammalian strategy is like, I'm going to create more vertical potential, right? It's going to take a lot more like neural organization to maintain that upright balance in an energy efficient manner. But I am going to have to make you warm-blooded, because, listen, you're going to be propped up all day. Well, Big Cat's going to be laying down on his belly for 23, go get dinner, and then lay down again, right? So the mammalian strategy is that sagittalization, where you take the limb that is lateral like this, and it starts to wrap and envelop, and now you have that vertical potential. And then it goes to like the human strategy, which is sort of, if I find a tree to make myself safe from the big cats and go get the free food up there, well, maybe we can sort of live in the canopy, right? Oh, yeah, right. And so now you might get bored in the canopy. And what if that guy's better looking than you? How you going to compete? You're going to get down, you're going to pick up a stick, you're going to pick up a rock, and you're going to go find a diamond, and diamonds are forever. And then you go to the jeweler, you get it set, cut, perfect, polished, and you bring it back up the tree and you say, hey, you want to go with me? And then your seed propagates.
So let me slow you down again. This is beautiful. I can see the depth of your evolutionary thinking. So you're basically talking about kind of a structural evolution of the chordates, right? This idea that we have this kind of tube-like structure that exists within an animal that has a front end and a back end, right? Have you read Nikolai Bernstein's Dexterity and Its Development?
Not cover to cover. I own the book. I've had it for, I don't know, I've had it for 15 more years or whatever. And so you have, if that's not under your belt, how are you ever going to build the pieces?
Yeah. So you've got the evolution of the chordates, and the chordates evolve first this lateral wave, right? It's not a vertical wave. Like a dolphin swims in a vertical wave predominantly, and a
yes,
and a shark
Predominantly.
has a lateral spinal fusion wave.
And he doesn't have the option.
Mhm. Yeah.
That.
And then we move into to reptiles and amphibians, and they have a relatively locked set of degrees of freedom. And if you read Bernstein, he goes really deep into how the brain has to evolve to handle these new degrees of freedom and this new
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
And so we're having this coil. This coiling mechanism is how we advance. And then as we move into mammalians, when we bring the limbs underneath the body and we open up new degrees of freedom, and then of course it costs more energy, requires more control. And then the vertical, the thing about moving into the trees, is the one part of your story that I think for me went a little bit off the evolutionary story as I understand it, is that getting the diamond. What we understand about why human beings end up, I think, on the ground, my understanding is it mostly has to do with climate change causing the breakup of tropical rainforests into more savanna and wood-like environments. So there's a lot more to move across.
Maybe it is Eden up in the canopy, and maybe Mother Nature says, well, that real estate's going away, and so now the motivation is, oh geez, like we aren't going to have this sanctuary. We better figure out how to
But
go
this is actually one of the really interesting sort of intersection points between your perspective and mine, because I've been thinking a lot about this evolutionary model of human beings and where we came from. And you talk a lot about locomotion, right? And how
that's all I talk about.
We get locomotion right, like everything as far as physical movement downstreams from it. And yeah, great. I think that the way that we tend to conceive of locomotion is a little bit aged, because we have removed the degrees of freedom of how we move in all these other locomotory ways, which is why I think parkour is such a powerful perspective, right? It's the opening up of all of the arboreal degrees of freedom that human beings have. And so when I read a book like Born to Run, it's like, well, yes, but we're also born to throw. And why can we throw? We can throw because we have an upright orientation, which we evolved not to walk on the ground, but to suspend ourselves from branches overhead and to be able to distribute our weight across multiple branches. And that's when we developed a chest that was flat and a shoulder with far more degrees of freedom, which is what's exapted into the capacity for throwing. It's brachiation that makes an animal that becomes throwing, which is, of course, what makes us more powerful than the tiger as a predator, is the capacity to throw.
Yes, leverage. Yes.
So,
yeah, I love your perspective, and I especially love the tie-in to arboreal locomotion. You have air, arboreal, land, bipedal, and then sea, right? And sea, you got options, but still, it's I think the most efficient stroke is this side stroke, most of the body underwater. And that's what we call the equation of that side stroke. We call that CCT, which is coiling core training or application, which means you're not going to the other side, right? If I go to the other side, we call that RMT, not CCT, and rotational movement training. And the rotational movement training, for example, will create that up and over potential, and it will also create the under and up potential, right? So you have both sides of the equation to shift weight from one to the other. It can be sort of an overhand shift. That's the way you're going to throw from up top. It could be that underhand, and that's the way you're going to run, right? So having that capacity to stay on the same side means when I'm locomoting, I don't have to have any vertical displacement. When I'm going slow, like not sprinting, then there's always going to be an up when I'm locomoting. The shoulders are going to be doing the under to coil so that the hips can do the over, so that the foot is elevated by advantage structurally. And when you're there, like when you get there, you're already there because the head is landing. And so the land load launch is 100% clean. So the way that we do it is body must solve the problem because I am not you. And my nervous system can't feel what you're feeling right now. So you have to feel it so your body can solve it. And again, if I tell you the solution is go over there and bang your head on the wall, you could do it, but it's really not going to be that helpful,
No,
right?
absolutely not.
Yeah. So it's a very simple strategy is I need positions, fundamental positions of differentiation,
Yeah.
longest and strongest coil.
Mhm.
Right? And it has to relate to gait. And it relates to arboreal is great because it just happens. The gravity, you're not fighting against the gravity, you're hanging with gravity. And so if you put your hand up and you're going to be fascially longest, this hand is going to be dangling, or the foot, this opposite foot will dangle over this hand if it's the best, and my head will be outside of that down foot. And
Mhm.
that is like, oh my gosh, the athletic potential of when I put that on the ground, I'm outside my base, but I'm in my base because I'm funneling all the force, and the differentiation is what allows you to do it. Because on an axis of rotation, if my axis is here, well, if something is behind me and I have to do this, well, it gets me every time. But if something's behind me and I can boom, change that pivot to more vertical, now I can dive to flank, and I can even run forward with the same side stride, carrying a spear with a
Mhm.
coil that lets me run and defend myself, right? The big bad wolf, his name is Snoopy, Fido, Butch, whatever, right? You got
Yeah.
every variety you want because we were able to subdue the wolf. And
Mhm.
then when we had fire, that's how the wolf comes, because the beta wolf, I'm not going to sire the next generation here. And, we walk a real long way. And this guy's got like, oh, the fat tastes better when it's crispy. The fire, the bones are easier to access, right? So some of the beta wolves, and that's why Caesar Milan can walk up to any dog, is because fundamentally in its DNA, it is beta. It's
Mhm.
looking for the guy who's going to tell him what to do. He's looking for that. And because he wants to fight that to be, because he wants to be that.
Yeah. It's I think the best way to describe it is that the dogs have been selected for juvenile uh juvenile sort of emotional capacities, right? Because you take a baby wolf of a certain age and you pick it up and it's going to lick your face and it's going to be your friend. I don't know if you're familiar with the Belyaev fox experiments. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Oh, it's this amazing story. So this Soviet researcher Belyaev, he wanted to understand the process of domestication. And so he took red foxes that were being farmed for their fur. And he selected two lines. One line was selected for intolerance of human beings because he wanted to make sure there was no like there was there was no sort of tacit selection going on. The other was selected for being willing to interact with human beings. So the fox, basically, the first generation of foxes, a few of them are just less freaked out when the human beings come in. And then the next generation, a couple generations down, they start to sort of tolerate human beings. And then a few generations down, they get excited when they see a human being. They start running up and wanting to be petted. They start whining.
Food.
And what's amazing about this is that as we selected for essentially a puppy-like demeanor or puppy-like emotional response to a human stranger, the foxes got shorter legs, they got smaller faces, they started having floppy ears, they started having piebald coats, they started having more variation of coat color, their tails started curling, there were dwarf variants because there's a set of genes called the Hox genes, which are developmental genes, and I think it's the Hox genes. But this developmental gene is what you're playing with when you change that animal such that it retains its juvenile tolerance for strangers and desire to kind of be loved into adulthood. But when you play with those genes, it turns out all sorts of other developmental processes are changed. So
Fascinating.
yeah,
Fascinating. Well, the first thing that jumps in my mind is, okay, what is the generational gap? Because if you take a orca and you put them in SeaWorld,
yeah,
well, that, and it's just a diminution of task. Because the wolf that's turning into a dog, he really loves you and it's genuine and they're a family member, right?
yeah.
But at the fundamental level, it's you're providing the food.
Mm.
That's the fun. Like, and I go over to my ex-wife's house 5, 6 times a week, and we have 2 little dogs, and we love them. They're amazing. But when I come over, I am Pavlov. Okay. As soon as they hear my car, they're like spinning in circles because I'm the guy who gives them more, if I'm going to give them a treat, I'm not doing that. And okay, here you go. I was feeding the puppy like eggs and steak and stuff, and they told me like, don't do that. Oh, okay. I thought I wanted to, feed them really well.
Yeah, I mean, we were partners in providing food, right?
Well,
That's
with that, yes, and that's where. So go with me on this because everything is just a story, and I'm not wearing that shirt today. I wear a shirt that says "What if."
Mhm.
Dot dot dot, and I have a big "What if" posted on the wall that goes to sort of my little inventor workshop at the lab here. Because when you begin with what if, well, then it's all possibilities.
Mhm.
So, what if you had different lines of hominins and hominids, right?
Yeah,
What if? What if there were different variations of the Homo
there
species?
were. Yeah.
Okay, well, what if, right?
Neanderthals had influence human beings. So we know there were genetic lineages that were separated by like 500,000 to a million years.
Okay, so now, okay, well, this will make the next conjecture perhaps more plausible as a possibility. Well, perhaps some of these hominids were larger and smaller and more tolerant of certain terrain and, smarter, not as smart, and all those things, stronger, not as strong. And maybe they were, Neanderthal, maybe didn't have like, Shaquille O'Neal height, but maybe he was, Mike Tyson height, but 16 times stronger than
Mm.
a Homo sapien, right? What if it is just, and what if it like, has a jaw and a mandible that just like can crush your femur? Just what if, right?
Mm.
People say there might be a Bigfoot. Maybe Bigfoot could snap you in half, right? So what if there's these Neanderthals? And what if, it's a game of real estate? Whoever has the best fishing pond, well, okay, that's easier to get dinner. I'm going to take it because I can. So what if the Homo genus was hunted?
Mm.
Hunted. What
Yeah,
if?
I've seen this. I've seen that. Well, we're a homo in the genus. I've seen this hypothesis. I mean, it's an interesting story.
It's just a story. And the point is that once the Homo lineage gets a hold of the dog,
Mm.
it's over. It's like AI now. If I get the wolf to do my will, he's no longer afraid of fire.
Yeah.
And
We,
that's the game changer right there, because fire is a dinner bell if the wolf ain't afraid, right? And you send the hounds in, you
yeah.
send enough in, and you got them, right? And now there's no more six-fingered men on the planet.
You don't have to conjecture Neanderthals that are 16 times stronger than human beings. We know that there are scimitar-toothed and saber-toothed cats and giant hyenas that are extinct, and they go extinct around the time or sort of subsequent to the time when human beings and dogs become partners, right? It's probably the earliest human dog partnership starts. But we had some monsters out there that we were dealing with.
I believe, and it's fun. And even if we didn't, if I can glean something from a story that gives me an image of, oh, if a wolf were chasing me, I'd get a long stick, I'd make it pointy, I'd dip it in poison, and I would just say, okay, yeah, okay, take your chances, right?
Yeah, there's this kind of reminds me of like Jordan Peterson stuff about the utility of myths, right?
Yes.
A dragon is
Ev-
not
ev- yes.
a dragon does not in all of its constituents existent in any one animal, but all of its constituents arise from all of the things that were most threatening to human beings. So it's a category that we hold in our head that's real for us. It's crocodile, snake, fire, eagle.
Well,
leopard, right?
Yes, if you read the I Ching, okay, the
Mhm.
I Ching is the book of change.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm on a podcast. Sorry about that.
No worries.
There's a tape machine, just like I can't hear myself. Where was I?
I Ching, Book of Changes.
I Ching, okay, the book of change. David Hinton has a translation of it. I've got a lot of copies, different translations, because that gives you different angles on the same text, even.
Mhm.
So in his translations, the best translation I have found so far, the introduction, he says, in the beginning, right, the Wu Chi, the Tao, you can't describe it, differentiated two dragons. Two dragons emerge, okay? And then one takes the feminine form and one takes the masculine, and they turn into humans. But the dragon can turn into whatever it desires, is the idea. So you
Mhm.
have this potential that I could manifest into different form. We got different animals, and there's that dragon energy that they don't just fly and breathe fire, but they're transformative, right?
Mhm.
So that sort of, and again, it's just another telling of the tale that can sort of, oh, I get a little more excited if I'm not thinking Puffs the Magic Dragon, or, I'm not thinking about whatever. I'm thinking like inside me is potential that I'm not even aware of. And it is so much greater than I can even conceive. Well, if that's how you wake up with that perspective, you're going to have a better day and it's going to be more productive.
The dragon, in some sense, represents like undifferentiated potential, right? So the idea of the dragon that
It's
seeds,
a stem cell. It's a stem cell.
yeah. But for some reason, this what pops into my mind here is I'd like to introduce you to another friend of mine named Simon Tacker. Simon is he does something called ancestral movement, which is very parallel to what I do, but he's based in Australia, and his exploration of all this started with psychedelic journeys. He was basically high.
The matches. I think little Jackie
Woods.
Paper. I think little Jackie Paper might have rolled it up.
But basically, he went through the whole Bernstein evolution of motor layers as a psychedelic experience. He went into the woods and dropped acid or psilocybin and discovered that, like, at the most basic layer, he was a worm, right? He had a mouth end and an anus end, and he was this tube, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Have you, I'm sorry, go ahead. I want to hear this and then I want to
And
ask
then he
you.
discovered his fish layer, right? That layer of the spine of the side to side. And then he discovered the monkey layer and all these things. And he started building up this idea of the ancestral movement. And what's interesting is some of the best work that I really like doing when I do with him is he's amazing at using the fighting monkey practice ball to to elicit movements of the spine. And he does all this stuff around the central axis of the body and how to get the spinal movements, all the different spinal waves generated. And he calls it the dragon body. And it's so like lined up with the stuff you're talking about how that central spinal engine, when we treat that as an engine and we understand how all of our movement downstreams after this capacity of the core, we're going to be able to produce so much more powerful movers than when we treat this spine as if it's something that has to be locked into the sagittal, frontal, and transverse plane, right? And not
Right.
the transverse plane.
If I'm teaching you with a ball and the ball's swinging on a rope or swinging and I'm taking it here and you're now what you're doing is you're equating all of your exploration in the movement of the core and the whole body, and you're equating that with teleception, that it's your eyes in your mouth. And if you wanted to turn even faster and further,
Yeah, yeah.
that's now the problem is you're going to bite it if the guy hits you. But Michael Jordan in the air sort of steered the whole thing cheetah tail with his tongue, now didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
That tension in the tongue is a counterbalance to the majesty of flying from the free throw line, and he's got that tongue.
Really fascinating idea. I haven't thought specifically about the tongue in relationship to this, but there's a couple thoughts that come up for me there.
Everything is tensional balance. Everything is tensional balance. And so it's the distribution and cooperation, funneling of force through tension and it has to be appropriate. It has to be correct, which means it's not overpowering and it's not too relaxed.
So let's stay on the tongue for a second here because it's fascinating to me. So the first thing that comes up is the tongue is the muscle that has the most degrees of freedom. I mean,
Yes, it only has an origin.
right? It can move in so much diversity of ways.
It can move Chinese, it can move Arabic, it can move English.
And then of course, if we understand the motor homunculus, right? The hands, the mouth, the lips, the tongue, right? The eyes, these are the things that sort of define the motor map the most deeply in the brain. And then when we look at the origin of sort of movement, right? We start by being things that seek with our mouth, right? And what makes
that we attain with our eyes, right? We seek with the mouth and we attain with the eyes.
And what makes primates so unique, one, is that we predominantly search through the eyes, so the olfactory system, but also we reach and grasp with our hands as opposed to our mouth.
Yeah, right. You manipulate the world with your hands.
If you throw a treat to a dog, the dog's going to bite it out of the air.
Yep.
But if you throw a treat to a monkey, it's going to catch it.
That's
Monkeys
right.
Small animals.
Right. Hey, and that means you could throw 2 balls to the monkey, theoretically. The dog's going to have a harder time.
Yeah. So human beings, we manipulate the world like this, but there is that deeper layer. Okay, so final piece on this. My son, as it turns out, was born tongue-tied. And
what, the frenulum was restrictive?
it was restricted and it was tied down to one side. So his tongue was actually asymmetrically developed.
Got it.
So my son is a really remarkable athlete. He's 10 years old. He has a 20-inch standing vertical leap. He can standing broad jump 6 feet 6 inches. He can do a one-arm lock off on each side for 20 seconds. Strict muscles, right? Pretty crazy little athlete. But he's always been a really quiet kid, and he was struggling to develop his ability to say S's and Z's. So I started asking like what he could actually do with his tongue, and realized that if he sticks his tongue out of his mouth, he couldn't lift it up at all. So I asked, the speech pathologist if, this could be why he's struggling with his speech. And then I reached out to Perry Nicholson from Stop Chasing Pain. I imagine you might have run into his work as well. He's like, you got him trimmed because the tongue affects the fascia of the entire body all the way down to his feet. So we get my son's tongue, we have we stripped that frenulum, and what was crazy is that all of a sudden he started talking more. He became more open, and just like his personality shifted when the degrees of freedom of his capacity to express with his tongue was released.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And he's such a great athlete, but what he doesn't have is he's very, very stiff in his feet and ankles, and has been since he was tiny. It's really, really hard for him to drop down into deep positions. So I have him in wrestling right now, in part because, there's so many reasons to have him in wrestling, but one of the things is like, you run really fast, you jump really high, but you're reliant on the stiffness, which is great. You want to be able to access that. But can you get down? Can you get down and use those range of motion of your hip? Can you explode out of your hips and feet low to the ground? Because that's going to be useful for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, anyways, you just kind of kicked me off on a bunch of stuff that's interesting to me. But yeah, tell me kind of what comes up for you around.
So
the tongue.
When my daughter was born, she had like a frenulum that, come to learn. And it was, shortly after birth. But what our, the doula or whoever was helping us said that in the old days, the midwife would take the pinky finger and sweep under the tongue to cut the frenulum. Mm-hmm. So it was just sort of like, rather than putting a hepatitis B vaccine into the kid, took the pinky finger, scooped under, and sliced the frenulum to free the tongue. And some kids needed it, and maybe some kids didn't, and everyone in between. But you're giving everybody the same chance to, to manipulate the tongue. And that's a piece of information of like the wisdom through the ages right? We're so smart that, go to the ear, nose, throat guy. He doesn't know it came from your foot. He doesn't care. That's not what he was taught.
We don't
So
have the holistic understanding of the body as these pieces of these bioconsegrities, right?
yeah, right. And when you mentioned, okay, the worm phase, right? That's what you're starting. There's a book called Emotional Anatomy.
Okay.
Okay. And this book I got it up at Esalen when I used to go up there. I would go retreat at Esalen, and
Yeah.
they'd make you sign up for a course. It wasn't like a resort. So I would sign up for a course. I just wouldn't go to the course. So I use the Esalen as like this, sanctuary for study and development, right? And there's a lot of books up there that it's gone way down in terms of what it is, but it used to be sort of the center of the universe because Ida Rolf started her, whole structural integration. It began at Esalen, right? So this is
Integral.
the what's that?
Ken Wilber and integral was kind of like very deeply related there as source of like the philosophical world as well.
Yeah, correct. Michael, what's his name? Michael Moore, the founder. I'm skipping. I'm basing on the last name. I'll think of it. But yeah, it was an epicenter of that human expansion consciousness, and that lends itself to body work, because if you come in there all like that, it's going to be hard to, communicate with, sort of that stuff. But in emotional anatomy, it's basically the development of these different layers. So it starts tube to tube. And then if you read Philip Beach, his book, Muscles and Meridians, this book, I've had this one. I think I got mine in 2000, I don't know, 7, 8, 9. I can't remember even when it was published, but I got it a long time ago. And it was a huge sort of insight into the embryology and the source, the origin. And once you reach this, your tubes inside of tubes inside of tubes.
Mhm.
And I've become good friends with Thomas Myers, anatomy trains.
Mhm.
And when he's in San Diego, we always get together in the lab and, talk for, it'll end up being 3-4 hours, is in there talking. And I ask him a lot of questions because, he has that Rolf, he got it right from Rolf, and I got it from Ed Mulpin, who was, in that first, batch of practitioners learning it. Right? You try to get as close to source as you can. But so I was talking about the limb buds, right? So they come out of what's called the Wolffian ridge.
Yeah.
When you're first embryonic, the fundamental differentiation between front and back is defined by this border, the Wolffian ridge, and that's where the hands and the feet pop out. And it is the hands and the feet bud out first. It's not like the arm comes, right? The arm fills in between. And this Wolffian ridge, I have used the diagram that I learned through Beach of that differentiation, that in my adult form, if I think in terms of this is the large intestine meridian right here. Why is it the large intestine? Well, maybe if you're a tube to a tube, well, then your mouth would be connected to your large intestine, right? So there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of method to the madness and the mysterious. And so it's our job to be open to it so that we can glean insight that makes today better. Because I would rather have an iPhone and an airplane and a hot meal, and I would rather have the creature comforts of today than live in the trees. Like, that's just me. I would rather. Some people, like, you're closer to nature than I am, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a believer. I always think we live in a paradox, right? Because we live in the best and worst time in human history, because never before have we.
Polarity like crazy. And I have a feeling it's going to get better than we can imagine. I just have that suspicion, and I'm very grateful to have it. And I think
I think I'm more.
Well,
I'm a more person who looks back, like my favorite book is The Lord of the Rings. It's
yeah.
But I want to tell you this because this is a story that lines up. So this idea of the emotional layers of the self moving all the way down to the deepest tube. So I've struggled with irritable bowel syndrome since my late 20s, or maybe really since I was 12, probably since I was 12 actually. But I started to really.
How old are you now? How old are you
40
now?
42.
42. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So I've been working with naturopaths, working with a therapist, et cetera, to try to overcome this and some chronic fatigue issues. And at kind of the beginning of this year, January, my wife asked for a separation. And so kind of downstream of that, I had to, for the first time, really grapple with the kind of emotional damage that I'd taken from being sexually abused in my early teens.
Oh yeah.
So this is all preamble to the part of the story that's relevant to what you're saying, but it was kind of necessary. So to try to kind of break through some of these patterns that were making me intolerable to my wife, and really to myself, I decided to do 6 weeks of internal family systems therapy for 6 days a week and somatic therapy once a week. And at the end of that, I did an MDMA therapy session. So I did the MDMA therapy session. Then I ended up doing 2 more, et cetera. But that was kind of the peak intensity of this experience. So I do my MDMA therapy. And when the peak experience hits me, I started shaking and I shook and tremored, and sort of my hands were like doing this, like shaking really hard and jerking for about 4 hours. So my Fitbit recorded that I ran 6 miles while I was laying flat on my back. And essentially it was like shame, disgust, anger, and fear that had been repressed and somatically stored for 30 years that were suddenly given space by this medicine to allow. And what I realized was that what the IBS really is this psychosomatic thing of having gone to the basic, having stored the most intense emotions at the deepest layer of the self that you could shove it away into.
Yeah.
And then what the MDMA did was say, okay, now your whole body can tremor and spasm the way that your guts have been spasming for the last 30 years. And so when you talk about like, okay, yeah, your large intestine has an emotional layering to it. It's like, okay, I have this really intense experience that shows how that layering existed within me, and then how through a very intentional process, I allowed it to sort of boom through my whole body.
I mean, that's profound, because you're right. I say that the body is the brain, the same way a man of war jellyfish is a man of war jellyfish, right? You can differentiate it so that you understand the locals, but it's all just information for the brain to keep oxygen coming to it,
Yeah.
right? And
Self is a body, brain, mind, right? Or it's a body, mind.
well, right. And attitude. I've heard of an experiment where, you're blindfolded and they convince you they're going to burn you with a hot iron, and they, come out of one with the ice and they touch you and it burns like 3 degrees, or, a 3-degree burn from something that on the guy with his eyes open is just like, it's cold. I don't care. So think about that, an immune response and a physiological damage. It's so powerful. The power of belief.
Yeah.
Because it is physiological and it's all just signals, right? So when you have a repository that is capable of not having to biomechanically compensate, right? If you could have all the emotional issues in the world, and I would argue that if you take a side center approach, right? Now you're going to have the capacity to be on one leg, sending the force clean, right? Without biomechanical restriction. You got enough emotional tie up, right? Yeah. And so now, boom, learn how the other side. And as long as I have both sides, then I can transition. And now there's no extraneous compensatory movement into little multifidi that are, the multifidi don't move, right? They articulate and arrange and make sure it's okay for the big movers to do their job, right? They're the little guy wires. They're not. If you just had them and you held the spine, you could bend it like, wet spaghetti, right?
Yeah.
But it would articulate better from having those little guy wires in there. And that's deep, deep, deep emotion. I was frozen stiff, right? Deer in headlights.
So this is an interesting. So, like to frame this for people, or to offer a different lens on it. For me, what's coming up again is that Bernstein book, right? Because you're talking about the level of tone, right? At the most basic muscular level that we develop is this level of tone, the ability to
In
sort
the
of
chronic muscles, not the phasic ones, right?
yeah. So you have your level of tone, and then you have your muscle synergies, and then you have, your coordinative patterns, and then your ability to solve problems with really complex movement. So the multifidi, as you're referencing, are essentially these muscles of tone, and tone, of course, is like we actually all had an experience of this today. So I sent my wife a silly video of a gorilla rapping, or of a bear rapping, or a guy rapping as a bear. Like it's like an old thug rap song that's been turned into a bear. And she comes up out of her office laughing and giggling, and we're having a fun little interaction. And I'm making my breakfast. And just from the corner of my eye, I just see her whole demeanor shift. And I'm like, you are super not happy about having to go back to work right now. Right.
Yeah, and you could see it.
And it's like, she didn't, I wasn't looking at her face. She didn't say anything, but her whole body shifted in a way that, now that I've really attuned myself through these MDMA experiences, I've increased my capacity for empathy massively. I can just feel exactly what she was thinking.
Right.
And know that she's like, oh, because I know the context and everything, but of course, like, that is happening at the level of tone. The level of tone is deeply emotional.
Yes. Yes.
But what's interesting to me about this conversation then is the way in which I think that the reason that I was able to benefit so much from my MDMA therapy and take to it so quickly, is because I'm so deeply integrated across all of these movement things, right?
Right.
Like, go back all the way to Plato and, the Republic. To become the philosopher kings, we have to start with gymnasia. We have to start with the education of the body.
Body, mind, spirit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let me just say, I just actually jotted, because your movement practice gave your body sanctuary for the fundamental, which is you're not going to fall down. You're going to be productive. And so you don't have to be protective with your movement, because the less productive your movement, by definition, it fills in with protective, because it's all protective at the end of the day, right? So maybe, just maybe, this gymnasia that you were doing gave you the wherewithal to go to the place that the other person, without that sanctuary and safety, couldn't reach, because they didn't have the vessel that could deal with oh my God, this stuff is trapped so deep. Well, what if those little spinal muscles were just a little stiff, that didn't let you create that sort of that nexus between the physical and the emotional, and sort of the storage of these traumas that create tonus, right? And the best position is the next position, and you're always gonna sway. It is gravity is happening, okay? And we are falling, right? The pen falls and it's still falling. There's an acceleration, there's an attraction, all right? And your bone density, just their blood pressure, everything is tuned to that. And then the 7.8, I mean, you can go crazy with this stuff until you're too healthy, and now you're back in the trap of you're a worried well. Enjoy. So we live in the best of times. It was the worst of times, right?
Yeah.
And in a sense, the chronology has always been that, and it's just hockey sticking right now.
Yeah. I mean, Dickens wrote A Tale of Two Cities, whatever.
That's where I got it from, right?
We live in a time when we're the safest from physical violence in history.
Oh, so safe, we're pathetic.
We have the most food available to us. We have the most warmth, right? We're not going to die from being too cold. We're not going to die from being too hot.
the most intellectual socio, whatever interaction and connection ever, right? The net, the web, the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. I mean, it's like, good grief. I can buy a
That is
set of,
great.
headphones that are eye goggles that bring, oh, I'm on the top of Mount Everest. You know what I mean?
So we have gifts that no human generation has ever had, and we don't know how to use them, and we don't know how to interact with them, and we've lost, and they've blinded us to the things that we most need. So we don't want to go back in some sense to not having the power that we have, but we have to go back to having the relationship of wisdom and connection that
And
was.
yes, and relate to gait is that relate to gait is home plate. I mean,
Mm.
that's where you start, because if you're not relating to gait, you're cutting off branches of the tree before you even got there, right?
Okay, so this mm, it's funny you describe yourself as a biomechanist, right?
I don't know what this is. I mean, inventor for sure, right?
Mhm.
Biomechanist for sure. Um, who knows whatever else, but yeah, my vocation is biomechanics. I'm a biomechanist, and from that stems training tools, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not the guy who's like, my gizmos are informed by probably more hours of study in biomechanics than anyone.
Mhm.
I would imagine, mailbox money with a psychotic tenacity. I've gone to realms that, you can't go there, right? Because
And
now
you have strong aspiration too. This is one of the things that I really believe in is like, you know, maybe I'm reading you wrong, but my sense is that like you really like doing stuff with your body and you really want to be really
I'm
into.
in the I'm in the grocery line and I'm doing little one-legged balances, and I can make it so that you could notice and I can make it so you can't, because it's fun for me, because athletic inadequacy is the cross that I have to bear, okay? And I used to be very, very angry that I'm only a Division III football player because there's no Division IV,
Yeah.
okay? And I'd have taken Bo Jackson plus as many hundreds of pounds that it would take, that I can never not score a touchdown, and you can never score your touchdown because I'm so amazing at football. And that's what I wanted when I was a kid. And, in high school, I really wanted it. And then I carried that intensity and that drive through college, where I knew I wasn't going to get it, but I acted as if I was. The same intensity of intent to win, because that's who I am. I would say I'm an empathic narcissist. Okay. So altruism is the get out of jail card for narcissism, as long as it's not malignant.
Mhm.
And altruism, all true is him. Ah.
Uh, there's they talk about the dark triad, right? Narcissism, Machiavellianism. In psychology, there's this idea of the dark triad.
I've never
Narcissism.
heard that. I never heard it.
Yeah. So there's narcissism, right, which is like orientation towards self.
Is that the base of the triangle? Is like that's the fundamental problem?
Sure. But then there's Machiavellianism, which is sort of like
Malignant.
manipulative. Yeah. And then there is
Sorry.
sadism,
And it's what?
right? Sadism, which is desire to enjoy other people's pain.
Oh,
Right?
wow. Yeah.
Then
That's
there's
the Oh no.
there's a golden triad that sort of is the opposite of that, which is like prohumanism, like empathy, etc. So I score relatively high on certain narcissistic personality indexes as well, right? Like I have a elevated sense of self or have had in the past, which may be a protective because of what I went through. But I also score high in the golden triad.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
I
so it sounds like you're
I
kind
mean,
of
that's what
mixing
I think.
something.
That that's what I think, and I studied acting for 7 years intensely in New York City. And that deep dive was extremely useful, because you're really mining your own emotional life to exploit for, the part or role you're playing. And then you bring that background of, the qualities of your life into the moment to, make it fresh and alive, right? So it's a living Christmas tree. And the And so that you can always take a story and put a subtext underneath it that makes what you see more interesting. So picture like, underneath this blanket is just a, whatever. But now let's say it has all these interesting things like, whoa, it's the same blanket. It's just layered with so much more. So basically taking that approach, you could say the Machiavellian, right? Which you would instantly say, oh, that's bad. But what if the Machiavellian is in fact sort of the thing that ensures that the meek shall inherit the earth? Because if you're not as good physically and, might makes right in the moment, and now you're not here, better to be crafty and understand that if I have, obsidian right here with a little bit of poison, well, you don't even know that you're dead, right? So, in the art of strategy, the art of war, the best objective that you could have is your opponent, enemy, whoever, doesn't even know that they're in a fight.
Yeah.
Like the parasite that doesn't sting or itch gets to hang out for a long time. Right? So what it is for good defined as perhaps as simple as my seed, not his. I don't know. It's a competition.
That would be the
I'm trying to layer something deep. I'm trying to layer to just try to comprehend it deeper and use that as a device to help as many people as I possibly can, as profoundly as I can possibly help them. And if that is the intent and that is the goal, well, how you gonna get it?
How do you get it?
Well, you could say, excuse me, peer review exercise science. I understand gait and locomotion, and it's true, and it's balanced, and it clocks faster, and it means that we should do certain exercises and we shouldn't do other exercises. Excuse me. He invented the Bosu ball. He's a charlatan. Like, oh yeah, he's just trying to trick people. He doesn't understand the science. All right, well, I'm the messenger here with the message, the most valuable message in the history of physical education that was once unnecessary because you had to hunt. You had to survive, and then you're a tiger. It happens naturally. You didn't need it. But I would say that the best of the world is you understand intent so deeply that you could make the tiger the best tiger because you teach the tiger intent that is correct, and you aim infinitesimally small at the center of X on the map. If I have an external objective, right? An order of magnitude is not within reach. If I bench press 100, I will never bench press 1,000. But if I go internal into intent, you can go orders of magnitude deeper. And now the internal is the intern all. If you're the hub, you can do this and the whole thing moves. Now, because I'm despised in peer review exercise and slandered, my ideas don't see the light of day for the people who have to take a certain certification for employment in high school, college, pros. If I want to be a strength coach, well, there is one door that I must walk through. And they're going to tell me that stiffness is, you need stiffness, and everything revolves around stiffness. And that's the story that they're telling and they're selling, because it is there's no motor learning whatsoever other than the negative effect of tension rising that's restricting you from being useful right now. Gravity is down and not up. And you'll hear that. I mean, now there's certain phases, right? In fitness, right? And the one that's become very popular is it comes from the ground up. Well, if you guys are starting on page 2, because first it goes down to the ground.
Sure. We have to
it doesn't come from the ground. It doesn't. It comes from heaven. It comes from heaven. And then your job is to funnel the heaven and deliver it with a nice meatball that you can hit a home run to the earth, and then you express it. So it does come from the ground, and then you have to deliver it. And here's the insight that you can glean from that. Balance begins with the upper body. If my upper body is not correct, then it doesn't matter what my feet do. And if my upper body is correct, it's a pretty simple job for my feet to do.
So there's a lot there that I want to pick up on. The jump from up down to the upper body is, I'm not sure I follow.
Down up. No. It's
But
it's
let
it's
me,
down up and it comes from above. So if
so,
I want to move,
so
it's intent of my being that gets it moving, and that creates a volumetric shift in this pressurized organism that is, in a sense, to move without moving. You have to, in order to move, you have to move without moving. So if we're talking about a straight line, you want your center of mass to go straight. You don't want your center of mass to move.
yeah.
But in order to accomplish that, everything else has to move so that I can move my center without moving it off the line.
Yeah.
And
So,
go ahead.
well, when you're talking about ground up, ground down, like it feels like we're having this really interesting dance between sort of like the deep physiological layer, the sort of like skill layer, and then like the way up here philosophical layer. But when you're talking about that, right, like there's this fundamental discussion at the deepest levels of like ontological philosophy about emergence versus emanation, right, which is ground up versus top down, right? Like to what degree does the existence of intelligibility depend upon the fact that there are like Platonic forms that inform the thing, and then how much of that arises, right? You talked about the Cambrian explosion, right? The emergence of new layers of order. How do these relate? So, what the ancient spiritual traditions and philosophy, to me, what they sort of tell us is it's always both, right? It's ground up and top down. We have to have emanation, and so you're always related to the ground. You're always connected to the ground. Like when I was doing my like this deep MDMA work, what my therapist told me is, remember, there's always the ground. Whatever's happening, the ground is supporting you, and there's always God. Right? You are always strong between heaven and earth, and if you can remember your connection to those 2 points, then you can feel safe.
The vessel, the meat puppet, right? If it doesn't feel safe because you're not in a sustainably balanced position when you're on your one leg, your balance is going to be bad when you're on two compared to what it would be if you had perfect on one. Okay. And the confidence, the confidence. I did a very interesting experiment years ago. I was at this, nature walk, the path, and you got the little wood chip pull-up bars and dip bars and such, right? So they had a balance beam on the ground, 6 inches off the ground. I'll jump and do a 360 on that balance beam. All right, now they got a dip bar, and the dip bar is a little higher than your crotch. The only thing you got to worry for is jump to the outside so you don't hit the other bar and don't straddle it when you jump. Okay, problem solved. I won't do a 360 because I might straddle it, but turn, I'll move. Right now, I went to a 7-foot bar. Now, okay, I'm going to rehearse which side do I want and how am I going to catch it with my arms, right? Because that's 7 feet. Right? Yeah. Now, I went to the highest one, which was like, I don't know, close to 10. It was really high up. It was for the purposes of hanging the rings that you were on. It was not for the purposes of doing a pull-up. So it's about 3 feet higher than the 7-foot. And let me tell you something. That's when it got real serious. And that's when I was like, am I going to do this? And I already had rehearsed the strategy of this, but now you got this like lump and a lump that's doing the rings. And okay, if I do that, I'm going to hit my knee in a ring, like all sorts of complications that if it were 6 inches off the ground, I wouldn't think. And so if you want to talk about emotions and tension, when you're scared, the tension goes up, which makes you pathetic, not athletic in that moment. And when you've habituated that the very foundation of your exercise program is to come in every day and you have to master the ability to not move out of neutral before we even let you do this. And the moment before the golfer hits the ball, before they said that before they hit the ball, they send a tension and they get super stiff. I'm like, no, they don't. No, they don't. As the spine passes through neutral at ball contact, it's like that's unforgivable. That's not saying adductor instead of abductor. And we all know you just, okay, whatever, edit it out. This is a fundamental mistake that is so verifiable that it's like, wait a minute, show me the video of a golfer. Show me the freeze frame.
So let's talk
So
about-
if you said it, no, but if you've said it, it means that I can't trust anything. If 2 + 2 is 5 and I'm not going to change my position, you might as well stop the conversation.
Yeah. So, okay.
Okay,
So-
back to head, back to
No.
upper being balanced. Is
Okay.
that the thing is that the thing that's like
No,
that
I'm all
power
over the
begins
place.
in
There's
the
so
upper?
many interesting things that we could go, but let's talk about the upper lower thing again.
Yeah,
'Cause that's-
okay. Yeah.
So, well, we talked a lot about the spinal engine and the
Yeah,
role
but-
of the spine,
right.
right? Like, so if we consider the spine the upper body, right? Well, yes, I mean, the legs come out of the spine. The spine does not come out of the legs.
What came first was the spine and the cranium.
Exactly.
That's
And
first.
of course, if we think about
Proximal.
yeah, and if we think about movement is organized from intent to action. The intent is originating at the spine and the brain, right? So if we get this right, then the relationships that are downstream, right? I've often thought about this idea, like I feel like a lot of the traditional sort of strength training practices, they orient towards the sort of prime mover muscles at the kind of pecs, shoulders, glutes, hips, and it's like, okay, these are, to me, these are kind of like the last layer of strength that we develop developmentally. Like these are the mirror muscles that come in at puberty, and they're a huge power when we get them. But if you think about it, to me, like the way I've thought about it is like, I want to be spine, hands, feet, neck, strong first. That's my security.
Neck is your core.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you add those things, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Give yourself the engine, right? When the structure can handle the engine, which is what happens developmentally.
Yeah, but coordination is how it's going to handle it. So
Mhm.
if it's not coordinated, you're still wearing the edge of the tire off. You just don't notice it, or you lift something too heavy, now you get hurt, right? So coordination is stability, and balance. I define the word balance it's coordination, right? So if I can play the violin, I got a really good balance of the articulation of all that stuff, right? And so it's balance, and the fundamental balance is the blood chemistry is the fundamental balance, right?
Yeah.
Because if that changes, well, then there's the problem now that's catastrophic, right? And then you can just apply this principle of balance. It's the yin yang, right? It's the Taiji symbol. It's if you differentiate it into opposites, that's the true theory of relativity. 100 degrees, is it hot? Relative to what?
Yeah.
To 1,000, it's not very hot.
I think of tone, right? Like,
Yes.
we have, a musical instrument, right? A string. What is the tension that allows you to achieve the ability to play the note that then is in coordination with the other notes?
So you can organize mathematically, musically precise movement to be a symphony, right? Orchestrating this wonderful dance, the song, the melody to God's glory, right? I love the music and math because that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I think about movement as fundamentally, like I'm thinking less of, like I'm very interested in skill, I'm very interested in strength, I'm very interested in these things. But I think fundamentally what keeps us coming back to these things consistently and sort of sustainably throughout life is that they deliver something that is more generalizable. So I talk about the idea of the local game and the meta game. So the local game is, for me, let's say it's parkour, right?
And it's inside you too. Yeah.
Local game, parkour, local game, basketball, local game, BJJ. Ultimately, like if I'm turning in a way in those things that makes me not as good a husband, that makes me more personally miserable in my emotional state, that makes me a worse father, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, okay, I jump farther. If I come home and I'm an asshole, like, what's the point? Right. So we're always looking at this idea of like, what is the highest level thing that I can go to? And what we found through the retreats in particular that we teach is this idea that fundamentally what everybody's craving is a greater capacity for connection. I want to have a deep connection to all the internal parts of myself and how I experience the world. I want to have a deeper connection to the physical world itself. We're so disembedded from the environment. We don't know what a tree is. We don't know what a hammer is. We don't know how to use these things. We don't know all this stuff that surrounds us. We don't know what it is or how it comes from or what we're doing with it. And then other people, right? And other living things. And then, of course, like the transcendent. Those are the layers that we're trying to do. And then what we want is connection. And that connection is an attunement, right? To come into tune, to be able to play, to be the string that's properly tuned so that it can play in the orchestra of whatever the music that is happening.
I love it. And I just came up with, tune your tone, right?
Yeah.
You want to tune your tone to appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And the capacity to change now. And I want 0 to 100 because 0 to 100 is not just further, it's faster. When I'm bogged up at 20, I can't accelerate as fast if I start from 0. So if I got 20 to 80, I'm going to do 60, which is less than 100, and I'm going to do it slower than if I have 0 to 100.
So you're talking about sort of like,
I'm talking about your ability
your capacity for tone. Your capacity for tone, you want to not narrow it down to this specifically adaptive mechanism.
No restriction is further, no restriction is faster.
Yes.
So if the tone is restricted because your nervous system is trying to limit that one joint where you pinch the nerve and now it doesn't know how to shut off. And you are not orchestrating balanced movement. So it believes that it has to stay on, and maybe it does because biomechanically you're not in balance. If a structure is not in balance, well, then it is not as strong, especially sustainably strong, than if it just had balance. And that's what the thing is. It is so simple. And coming back to sort of this, I say balance begins in the upper body. Okay. Think about the neurology. Which is a faster signal, the fingers and the hands or the feet? Right? It's faster to send a signal from the cervical than the lumbar. Yes, it is. Right? It's a lot faster. And in martial arts, where the head goes, the body goes. Okay. Well, that's an interesting thing. Right?
You also have degrees of freedom. Right.
Yeah. Well, yes, because now
your torso, your hands, your head has so many more degrees of freedom to align you precisely than your feet, legs, ankles.
Yes. And okay, so now taking that into consideration, right? It doesn't come from the energy comes from the ground, magnetism comes from the ground. That's what's buffering the solar and astral wash that isn't strafing atmosphere off it's magnet. It's a big biomagnet toroid that is the bubble that we are in that is safe. And it changes like, it's this whoosh, whoosh. And so as this thing spins and now it's at nighttime and we get a little, there's an eddy effect. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's nice to sleep now. Maybe energetically it's sucking you in. I don't know. Right. But this is going to be quite the roller coaster ride for a listener. But back to this upper lower relationship and hierarchy. The strength and conditioning world, if you're going to tell me that like the hips and glutes and these things are same as pecs, and lats are actually the thing that's both. Ida Rolf defined the core as you have a core structure and you have a sleeve structure. Okay. The pecs, the traps, the lats tie in, that has degrees of freedom because it's a sleeve. It's draped over a core. Okay. So if you're equating the shoulder as like, it's the rigid core. Well, now you're not even correct anatomically. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. What's coming up for me is actually going back to like Joel Smith, our mutual friend, talking about this how we get balance from the upper body. And so what's coming up for me and thinking about this idea of degrees of freedom. So if we want to adjust our acceleration strategy think about the different, he talks about different strategies for producing speed that come out of different demands, right? As a parkour athlete, I'm actually going to adopt a different sort of max velocity strategy than a track athlete because I have to deal with different types of demands. So one of the really interesting things is we know that, or I find this really fascinating and important. One of athletes who are just track athletes, they really, really maximize for minimizing time on the ground and maximizing flight time. But we find that you can get really, really fast athletes in the NFL, like Tyreek Hill, right? This is a guy who can run a 10, 15, 10, 20, 100. He spends like 80% of his time on the ground, if I remember correctly. And that time on the ground is time that he can change. And that's important because if you can achieve the result while having your feet on the ground more, then you have more degrees of freedom to change the behavior of the system.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And what I would say the corollary there is the objective is the least time on the ground, but it's not the highest up or longest time in the air. It's the length that you go.
Yeah.
So the gap in time of
you want to be able to increase stride length for sure. But
well, and basically what it amounts to is the physics of it, because at a sprint, I don't want any vertical bump. If I'm doing a marathon, I have to vertically bump, like coming up and over, up and over. But at a sprint, you're at the theoretical tallest and you're stabbing down to these things where you're still just as tall, just as tall, just as tall. So only in the air traveling that distance, pretty similar to the person who can't run well, who's on the ground forever. When they leave, they're going to only travel this distance in a similar time. There's difference in air time, but the time on the ground is what gives you more vertical potential because the sprinter is maxed out vertical and they're so high up vertical that they can't slow down. So, and that level, a sprinter goes to fifth gear, and fifth gear was non-essential for survival. It's a contrived thing to race you because a wolf, it doesn't matter. And if I'm going to run 10 seconds and now for the next, I'm going to be so physically exhausted that I'm still sweating a half an hour after the 10-second effort. Well, that's not the best use of your energy in almost every single circumstance that you would ever find yourself in 100,000 years ago. Right. So, and time on the ground.
I'm going to run.
Oh, please, let's go. That's great. There's very little pushback.
Remember, if you're being chased by a bear, you don't have to outrun the bear. You have to outrun the guy next to you. So if I can run fast in seconds,
that's good. But
right. Or sometimes you're escaping fire, right? You're escaping other things. So this capacity for that fifth gear, it matters. But but
let's talk about the fifth gear.
This is kind of like an area that I'm thinking about a lot because parkour, right, is let's say it's an art of the ability to move between a continuous action cycle like running.
Yep.
And integrate it with a extreme diversity of discrete motor skills, and then be able to link those motor skills to each other with the minimal interruption and the best ability to link very distinct movement phases.
Yes.
So then there's always a question. So one of the things I think about a lot is like, okay, you look at a vault, right? So you could do I don't know if you know what a Kong vault is, where you dive to your hands off of it.
And then bring the legs through like a cat kind of thing?
Yes, exactly. Okay. So that's a Kong vault. Now, consider structurally what's happening there and rhythmically what's happening there versus a hurdle, right? What's happening in a hurdle? A hurdle is structurally much more similar to running, and thus it can be accessed at a higher speed.
Yes.
I cannot approach an object at 90% of my peak velocity and effectively access a Kong vault.
Yes.
And do it with a hurdle. Now, if we look at a hurdle, right, we think about a classic hurdle, like a track and field hurdle. It's a really great movement if you know 100% that you're going to be running directly forward out of it. But because you lengthen your stride so much and you bring that leg out to the side, the landing position has very few degrees of freedom to adopt. So if you watch athletes in the NFL, when they hurdle, they come down with 2 feet together because then they can cut, change direction, move in different ways. And this is the same point that I'm making. This is related to the point I'm making about the value for the team sport athlete in the times that they have on the ground, because It's when they're on the ground that they can shift their arms, they can twist, and more easily apply force.
No. You're
Nope.
moving your arms and stuff in the air, and you're touching
absolutely.
down.
You can do
It's
it.
not when you're not moving when you're on the ground, because there's not enough time to really move very far, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm sprinting, I'm on the ground less than a tenth of a second. So most
Sure.
of my movement is in the air, and then the knees come together, bing, and then you're off again, right?
Mhm.
So that's the idea that and even say as a sprinter, run in the air. If you run on the ground, you're on the ground.
So all that movement prepares you for that moment when you're on the
Yes,
ground.
it's all preparation. Here's what I would say about parkour. Okay, Tim Sheaf is a dear friend of mine, and I studied the parkour in amazement. Okay, and what I say parkour is, it is basically the art of appropriate deceleration. Because if I'm gonna land from 40 feet up, if I don't know how to perfectly decelerate by distributing the wheel and the roll and the continuity of, all that stuff, then I'm going to splat. And they're doing things now that are unrealistically impossible, where you're like, you know what? A human being, we compete with just about any other animal, both physically, because I don't think a tiger could get up the same traverse on that building as the kid can.
Yeah. Well, that's what, this is like, I think I've been gesturing at this, but when you look, like, go back to Bernstein, dexterity development, think about how he lines out what a human being is. And this is such an interesting thing, because you've been talking about how we've layered artificial constraints on our movement that actually take us away from X on the map.
Yes. And one of those is incentive to acquire food, shelter, clothing.
Sure. So let me lay this chain of thought out. So why can't I think you cannot mess a tiger up to the same degree that you can mess a human being up, because neurologically,
and a baby deer can't be messed up even more than a tiger, because the baby deer is facile at locomotion a half an hour after birth.
But human beings take so long because they have this capacity, because we're the only animal that can swim really well, that can climb trees really well, that can swing through the air, that can sprint on 2 feet, that can sprint on all fours.
Play the piano.
Yeah. We have greater degrees of freedom, but then that means that we have more ability to find spaces in sort of the motor problem space that are actually not optimal solutions.
Yes, you fall into the gaps because it's because you do not have the externality that forces the attenuation to perfect, because the consequence is death, right?
We don't have extinction functions. But okay, so
but I also want to say, like, it's amazing. We'll do another episode, and then you do one with a panel, like ask us a question, right? But getting back to this fifth gear of a sprinter, okay? And I love that you can run faster than your buddy, than the bear, right?
Yeah.
And if one of you has, like, a chicken or something, you do that, maybe get away. Right? But the thing is, if the bear is chasing you, your situational awareness was so poor that if you were to do that again, the odds of you surviving go way down, because it's flip a coin. Okay. Because what if the bear doesn't care that you're faster, because he's faster than both of you, and maybe he's going to have more fun playing with the mouse that can be even that much more challenged, right? So the point is, the caveman never ran away from a saber-toothed tiger. Never, ever would you run from a saber-toothed tiger. It's the worst thing you could possibly do. You get your buddies, you all talk, you line them up, you know where he is, and he didn't surprise you, and you point your sticks at him, and you say, bend the knee, get the fuck out of here, I'm gonna eat you, doesn't matter, move away from your kill. If you were running away from it, you had made a fundamental mistake. The fight that happens at 5 p.m. started at 5 a.m. Everything was situationally bringing you to that moment. So the caveman did not run away from the saber-toothed tiger. Okay, he didn't do it. He didn't.
Definitely did run away from saber-toothed tigers. Now, whether they survived when they did, like, think about
Okay, right, but that's my
what is the worst thing that you can do?
That's my point.
What is the worst thing you can do in combat? Turn your back to the enemy and run. With predators, the worst thing you can do is turn your back and run, because now you trigger the pursuit instinct.
Yes, you don't run away from saber-toothed tigers. You don't.
Okay, but
That's a modern thing.
sometimes you have to run
eat.
to a saber-toothed tiger.
What's that?
There's another aspect of sprinting.
Where?
Have you seen this video? There's a bear that's crawling over a wall, and there's a bunch of dogs in a yard. And this woman sprints that house and rams that bear off the wall. And the bear
I didn't see
falls off
that
the
one.
wall.
I didn't see that one.
And this is something that I think is interesting because, like, we think about parkour as escape, but parkour is also reach, right?
Yes. It's acceleration and deceleration, the priority being the deceleration, and the acceleration is the capacity to ever, enhance the, the spectacularity of what you're doing. But it all comes down to deceleration. And what you decelerate when you spend more time on the ground, like you're saying, because even to get to fifth gear that you could traverse 100 meters with our anatomy, right? Maybe they were better or worse earlier, but even to do it requires this buildup in speed on a smooth track that has the perfect bounce and super shoes and blocks, and you're right there, and it's a balancing act for 45 steps. That was never, ever even available. They tried to run as fast as they could, but they never got to fifth gear.
Yeah, for sure.
Spikes. They didn't have spikes. We have the ability to engage in trivial things that are amazing. All right.
Yeah.
I can play tiddlywinks and I can play basketball. I can read a
Well, I think I understand what you're saying now. So, like, when I go train on a track, right? I put spikes on and I train on the track.
Yep.
And I think of it as over speed work. For me, as a parkour athlete, putting spikes on and training on a track is over speed work because I'll never hit the same velocities in my primary sport as I do on the track. It prepares me and it makes my nervous system better able to solve problems at lower velocities.
100%. 100%. But if that were all that you were studying, right? And you were truly studying it with all that you bring to it from a parkour perspective, which would probably be greater depth of movement understanding than any running coach by a factor of 1,000,000. Okay. So the fact that no sprint coach has ever told someone that lateral action is actually good and your destination is head over foot. The fact that that little hill was even available is ridiculous. I think the fact that we even have personal trainers is ridiculous. What we should have is we have dance teachers, jiu-jitsu teachers, we have archer teachers, we should have arboreal teachers. We don't need someone to overlord and do push-ups. Like, what? Why is there even an in? That is indicative of a fundamental problem. You should have the basics covered. Breathing, okay? Breathing, blood, bones, balance, and then add muscles, right? Okay. If I have effortless power because I can move my sticks, my bones are just as strong at 103-degree fever as they are at 98.6. My bones are just as strong. Everything else is weaker, but my bones are just as strong. You carry water, you carry sticks. That's your blood and that's your bones. And if you can't do that, Houston, we have a fundamental problem. There is an irrationality in someone's behavior. Every molecule of that mass is now not resonating as it would if you had an instrument that was in tune. So the tone could vibrate and flow and move without compensatory restriction. Compensatory restriction is the enemy. It is the absolute enemy. You want fluidity that can pressurize instantly. I want to exist physically in a parasympathetic state that can be sympathetic without freaking out any second I want, every millisecond I want, and snap right back to parasympathetic because the cat catches the mouse, because I'm going to eat tonight, right? I want to have the ability poised to pounce.
Okay. I want to do a couple things here. So, first of all, I want to go to your point about track, because I think this is fascinating. Because there's so much attention that's been paid to specific technical models of skill in sprint performance.
Yeah.
And the reality is that if you take Jesse Owens from 1936 and you adjust for the track and the shoes, third fastest athlete in the race in which Usain Bolt set the all-time record. 90% or 95% of all sprint performance improvement in the last almost 100 years is due to changes of equipment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you
So,
what, another thing.
and watch
What
Jesse Owens run and ask yourself how much it looks like
effortless.
optimal look, but ask yourself how much it looks like what you're supposed to spring like.
Yeah, by today's standard, they say wrong. But the thing about Jesse Owens is there's precious little footage to analyze. Okay. So in order for me to see him run from the front, I had to dig up a video clip post-career when he was running against racehorses, you know, to make a living. Okay. So that's what he was doing. And it's the blurriest, grainiest footage. But what I was able to glean from this footage, and I got it somewhere buried in my iPad from, you know, this is going back 7 years. I don't know how many. Head over foot, both arms down. These are that is the most fundamental thing.
Yeah.
It will double down pulse if it's connective tissue recoil that exploits the energy-free tissue in your body that's springy. So your muscles aren't having to do that, getting sore and tired and slow. It's bing, bing, bing. If you watch someone really fast with their shirt off, tearing down a 40-yard dash, you're going to see ripples of force going through this fluid erector spinae and the lats. It's, you know, that's what it is. It's pressure waves. It's not this muscular contraction and all this stiffness, right? So we are about to embark on a paradigm shift for movement training and physical education because you don't have a choice. Fosbury defined the best biomechanical strategy that coincides with the reality of physics as we understand it, that you got to do his flop, which was a derogatory brand, right? Oh, he's a flop. And Western roll, scissor kick, none other is as effective. But 4 years after Fosbury did it in 68, he set the gold record. He really with the Olympic record. 4 years later, the guy did it a gold medal, not as high as Fosbury, and he did it the old technique. So we have this stasis of cognitive dissonance and willful ignorance from the experts who have control. And it's the same in everything. And the huge opportunity here, okay, the exercise industry, the peer review, the ones who have commandeered science for their own benefit are good people underneath. A lot of other industries that engage in the same scientific fraud, which is we're going to lord over the science that ain't true for as long as possible, because there's a lot of money in those fields, they draw the evil. And one of the reasons why someone like a Jesse Owens, you know, can be historically, if you control, you can speculate and conjecture that, yeah, it's a bigger difference on a cinder track where every step is digging in, you know, a quarter of an inch, right? That's going to be more than a mondo that bounces. Okay. Like that's true. But what we have now is we have the economic, the financial incentive and the, you know, just the higher standard of living that there's more people available. If I can make $100 million to shoot a ball in a thing from the age of like before I was born, my dad was planning it. Right. And so, and now you got everybody coming out of the woodwork. That's going to take the mean average and make like, you're going to have a whole pool of people that are like Jesse Owens level. And in Jesse Owens' day, there's only a handful, but you're right. You're right.
That's what's crazy is that he's still there, right?
Yes, exactly. I think, well, think about running. Running is basic. Boxing is basic. Who's the fastest man in the world? Who's the baddest man in the world, right? In boxing, I think boxing is the one sport that most demonstrates that it would be possible to compare eras. Football, you can't compare the era. MMA, you can't compare the era because there's an advance. Boxing, 4 punches, the sweet science. You had guys like Sugar Ray Robinson. God knows, maybe he slaps everybody else silly now.
I don't think we beat like Hearns and Hagler and those guys like the Four Kings era. I don't think the modern guys can touch those guys.
But what it was they had to fight for money. Now you don't have to fight for money because one fight sets you up for life kind of a deal. There's less incentive. And now you do the Mayweather thing. Well, I'm only going to jump to the lily pad that I'm pretty damn sure I'm going to win. I'm not going to jump to the lily pad where it's going to be a risk, a higher risk. I'm not taking away from him. He's probably technically the greatest boxer ever because he had the genetics and then he had the environment. And the nature and the nurture, nobody was so blessed as Floyd Mayweather. The other guys, though, had to come up harder, right? And maybe they had, if you fought 10 weeks in a row, probably the Sugar Ray Robinson, the Jake LaMotta, these guys who fought, like Sugar Ray Robinson go on a tour in Europe, and he's fighting every 2 weeks. He's fighting every 2 weeks. He didn't get a paycheck. He didn't get a paycheck.
Yeah, we have the equivalent of those fighters in the world today. It's just that they fight Muay Thai. Right? We have kids who've been raised from the day they were born. If you want to see the world's greatest combat athlete, he's over the hill now, but his name is Sanchai. And he's everything that, Sugar Ray Robinson was in his day. It's just that he lives in a culture that's at that
kick a banana tree till, it doesn't hurt anymore. But I would also say this, but check this out. An empty-handed combat is such a contrived bullshit scenario historically. I don't give a fuck about your Muay Thai. I'm Indiana Jones, bitch. Bang. So empty-handed, again, it's the wonderful reward of the sanctuary that we've been able to construct, that the big bad wolf is in the zoo, the bear, the tiger, fucking orcas in a goddamn. If we could, we'd put a blue whale. No, actually, no. There's the blue whale is dead in the Smithsonian or wherever it is, right? In the Museum of Natural History.
Rory Miller's a really amazing self-defense author who wrote an incredible book called Meditations on Violence. I highly recommend it. We have this
Meditations on Violence?
Meditations on Violence, yeah.
Okay. Yep.
We had this discussion for a while about fist strikes versus palm strikes. And he's really like not into fist strikes. I'm more like,
Boss root.
I've punched people in the head. If a fight comes my way, I'm probably punching somebody in the head. And if I break my hand, I'll live with the consequences. Listen, there's scientific, or there's some anthropological research that he's pointed to that says that cultures that don't have metal weapons don't engage in fisticuffs. They only wrestle. Somehow, in this point where we get to metal weapons, we start going there. But like a lot of cultures, they have wrestling and they have stick fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're good, if you're good with a stick, you are good with your body.
Yeah.
And so one of the
such a funny thing, I have to tell you this. So I was listening to your podcast with Joel Smith and Chris Chamberlain, right?
Yeah.
And you guys were talking about sticks, ropes, and rocks.
Yeah, those are the basics.
So within our system, right, I took, so I was inspired by Méthode Naturelle, George Hebert's system, right? And I worked with Erwin LeCour from MoveNat back in the day, and he was trying to expand the 10 categories that Hebert offered, right? Hebert had walk, run, jump, climb, quadrupedal, balance, swim, lift, throw, and defend yourself. Those were his 10 categories. So of course we can obviously add throw and catch, right? We could take defense and we can make it, grappling, striking, whatever. But I was like, what if we, instead of thinking like, what other categories do we need? How do we collapse these down into subcategories? So the subcategories, basically the first 7 are locomotion. Walk, run, jump, climb, move on all fours, swim, balance, locomotion.
Yeah.
Lift, carry, or lift and throw is manipulation of objects. And then the last one is defense. And then if we add
carry is locomotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And carry on the high side. Sure. It's a single side stride if you're carrying. Yeah. Right? So, it's not neutral. You're not going to carry it like that.
Well, but this is part of the way that I think about that. Carrying is locomotion. Actually, so is lifting. Because you're still
correct. Yeah. That's what here's what now you get into semantics like did your feet move?
but like I think about I trained MMA for a long time. I sort of stepped away from MMA and spent 9 years just training parkour. I went back to MMA and I had guys
who were better. And you were better.
I was better. Because
you had sensitivity with hard objects that you're going to die if you're not sensitive enough to decelerate at an appropriate rate.
And I can just locomote my body so much better. And to hit someone, to be afforded the ability to hit someone is it's actually locomotory, right?
Yes, of course.
Escape a hit is locomotory. So locomotion is fundamental to all of these things.
It's eat, don't be eaten, creates locomotive necessity. Otherwise, you're a plant and you just put out poison, so you don't got to locomote.
So then my three categories were first locomotion, manipulation, and combat. And then I was like, well, what about dance? And then like, what about shared work? Like you and I are sawing something together. So I made that top category interaction, because as soon as you have to coordinate,
playing catch is interaction.
Exactly. Yeah. So interactive movement, locomotory movement, manipulative movement, and then something like playing catch, it can be all three, right?
Of course. Right.
Exactly. Right. It layers it. So it's like a great football player or basketball player. Nikola Jokic is my favorite athlete in the world right now. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I like the attitude. You ain't gonna stick a needle in me. And willing to sacrifice world championships and historical records.
I think that's Kyrie Irving, but
Djokovic, the tennis guy. He was
Jokic. No, I'm talking about Nikola Jokic, that basketball player.
Oh, so I thought you said Djokovic. Sorry.
Okay. So you have all those abilities, but then my whole perspective was built on play research. And then parkour is a form of exploratory locomotor play. And then if we took that inherent drive to play that drives all the kids who go out and do parkour, we looked at all the physical cultures, like how could we play with it? So I
love it. That is, I mean, like you said, you found X on the map, you move with perfect balance, right? I mean, and you do. And now you had that cathartic thing that got rid of stuff that, was impossible to get rid of without tapping into the emotional release, right? Because physiologically, you'd never have figured it out, right? And that freed you up to be better physiologically. And that gives you resolve, that you have more confidence, right? You have more energy. Your burn rate went down. There's, you filled the hole in the tire, right? All the metaphor, all the analogy for what you did. And you have arrived at a mechanism, means by which you can enhance the life of another human being so profoundly by giving them a better vessel. You don't live at, 1212 Main Street. You live in your body, because it worked when you're on 22 Main Street. Well, guess where you live, right? So you live here and now, where you are, in the vessel, in the body, right?
Yeah.
And if the body is betraying you because you just didn't know better, what a shame that is. That's like pushing on the pull door and wondering why the door is locked. You know what I mean? It literally, you can boil that. Now, I'm a boil down guy. I'm a distill down. All right. I want to put it in the crucible until it's just carbon atoms. There's nothing else. Like it's perfect. Okay. It's 100%. That's what I'm into, distilling. So what I say is my objective, my lighthouse on the shore: fight, flight, response, ability. Okay. Fight, flight, responsibility. That's it. If I am true to those things, I have a subjective measure and I have an objective measure. Fighter A will beat B and B will beat C, but C beats A. Styles make fights. My master is better than yours. We're going to different heavens and hells. We'll never agree. 9.58, 9.58, 9.58. If you tell me that somebody else is faster than Bolt, well, then we're all going to ostracize you as the moron, the dishonest, right?
Kyrie thinks he's faster, but anyways.
Come on, that's marketing, and that he knows he's not faster. It's just fun to mess around. He's the 50 Cent of fucking speed.
Okay, so fight. So I came up with this list of F's. Fight. So fight and flight. That's me, right? Like MMA parkour guy. Fight, flight, funk, right?
Funk?
Dance.
Okay, yeah, getting funky. Yep. Okay, right. You got that now.
Function, you got to be able to make stuff, do stuff.
Okay, function.
You want to be able to freak.
Okay, freak. Okay, right. But you also guess what the sixth thing is? The sixth thing called sex, and it's fucking. Add that to your list.
We call it freak. freaky.
No, you better stop calling it that. It's got a different definition today, and it's
Okay.
only rulers.
So there's your 5 Fs. But so here's the funny thing. Okay, so if you think about when I started thinking about this manipulative aspect in the middle, right? So we've got locomotion and interaction. So I'm a good martial artist. I'm a good parkour athlete. Those are
Yes.
pretty dialed in.
Yes.
There's some things we can do to get better at them than those models, but those are the best models to start with, MMA and parkour.
Well, that's the fundamental model. Everything is layered on top of that model.
Mhm.
Because you're either fighting against gravity without skill and that, or you're fighting with gravity, delivering heaven to earth in a manner that God would have you do if he were to come down and walk in your shoes. You think God would do a Palloff press? Are you kidding me? He would be very frustrated. He would be like, "What are you doing? I didn't make you to do this. I didn't make you to do that."
So good. Jesus doesn't want you to pal off presses. You should make that a teacher.
Okay, now, Jesus, right? Turn the other cheek. What if it's not just, oh, okay, hit me again? What if turn the other cheek is you going to turn the cheek and you going to slip that punch? I just turned my cheek now, didn't I?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, okay. So anyways, I thought this was fun. We have a video coming out. It features, we talk about you because the rope has become a fun part of our practice. But
it's the Rosetta Stone, baby.
But what I came up with years ago is because the first way that I could only think about manipulation from the perspective of being a guy who did strength conditioning at first. And I was like, I know this isn't the right thing to do. And I was trying to teach these workshops where I'm taking people into these things. It's like, okay, I'm going to teach you to do vaults and run and jump and climb. I'm going to teach you to fight, and we're going to do deadlifts. Like, nah, I don't need to teach you how to deadlift, right?
Pick up a big rock, pick up a stone. That's going to have a little more carryover to what you do.
The stone, right? So that's where we came to, is that what do people play with physically? You boil all the way down. What's the original toy? It's a stick. It's a stone,
a rope.
Those are the three.
1, 2, 3. In that order. I'm going to say in that order.
Yeah.
And maybe rope came before rock in some cases, because you got the vine, you got the flexible branch, right?
We're playing on those things. So my friend Aaron Cantor is one of our coaches. He likes to make things alliterative. So we've got the rod, the rope, and the rock.
I love him, okay? Because I love alliteration too, because we must funnel the force fluidly through the fascia, through the floor, through the feet, and that is function. That's right. Feel good. Feel fantastic. Well, I just swallowed my knick-knack. I laughed and I sucked it in. Oh, I got the tingle in my windpipe. Hey, I have a phone call scheduled at noon.
Yeah, it was a good time to stop.
What I'd love to do is let's queue up another one, man.
Sure. Let's have a chat.
This is awesome. Yeah, and then where are you located?
I'm in Bellingham, Washington, 2 hours north of Seattle.
Okay, great. Well, anytime you're going to be in Southern California, we need to get together in person. That is essential. And if I find my way up that way, I will let you know. But I can't wait for the day when we're together, interaction, because that's where what's going to happen from those interactions is that is the fertile soil for new discovery, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Insight that has the capacity to help as many people as possible, as profoundly as you can help them.
Yeah. We'll get Tim Sheaf and Joel Smith and DJ Marconga to join us. We'll just have a crazy...
And Chris Chamberlain, and we can bring a whole army.
Yeah, this is super fun. Thanks for your time, David, and we'll talk again soon.
That sounds fantastic. This is amazing.
Bye-bye.